Ayana didn't think her life could get worse than begging at a metro station in London. Then her billionaire grandmother, who she thought had abandoned her, pulled up in a Rolls-Royce and asked one question: "Where's the £80,000?" Ayana turned and pointed at the woman stepping into a limo across the street. "Ask her." The cold November rain at King's Cross Station had a way of making everything worse. Ayana Okonkwo sat on the wet pavement, with her cardboard sign propped against her knees, her fingers numb inside fingerless gloves that had seen better days 3 winters ago. The sign read, "Homeless and hungry, please help," in faded marker, the letters bleeding from countless rainstorms. She was 21 years old, though the mirror in the public toilet had shown her a face that looked 30. 3 years of sleeping in doorways, shelters, and under bridges had carved lines into her dark skin that no young woman should wear. Her hair, once thick and beautiful like her father used to say, was now hidden under a dirty wool cap. She kept her eyes down most of the time because eye contact made people uncomfortable, made them walk faster, clutch their bags tighter. But she had learned that the trick was to look pathetic enough to inspire pity, but not so broken that people feared you might be dangerous. It was a balance she had perfected over 1,000 humiliating days. The evening commuters rushed past her like she was invisible. A river of expensive shoes, designer handbags, and people whose biggest worry was whether their train would be delayed. Ayana had once been one of them, back when her father was alive, back when she had a home in South London with heat and food, and a future that sparkled like the acceptance letter from the London School of Economics she had hidden in her backpack for 3 years. She kept it with her always, a reminder of what she had lost, what had been stolen from her. Sometimes late at night, in whatever shelter would take her, she would unfold it carefully and read her name printed in official letters. "We are pleased to offer Miss Ayana Okonkwo admission to the London School of Economics." It felt like reading about a different person, someone who had died the same day her father's heart gave out. The Rolls-Royce Phantom appeared through the rain like something from another dimension. Ayana noticed it because nobody drove cars like that through the regular pickup zone at King's Cross. Those cars stayed in Mayfair and Knightsbridge, places where people like her current self were shooed away by private security. The car was midnight blue with chrome that caught the streetlights, and when it slowed down directly in front of her, Ayana's first instinct was to grab her things and move. Rich people didn't stop to give money. They stopped to complain that you were ruining their view. But then the back door opened and a woman stepped out, and Ayana's entire world tilted sideways. She knew that face. She had loved that face. Folasade Okonkwo, her father's mother, the grandmother she hadn't seen since the funeral 3 years ago, stood there in a cream-colored coat that probably cost more than Ayana had begged for in her entire homeless life. Folasade was 68 but carried herself like African royalty, which in a sense she was. She had built a telecommunications empire across West Africa, owned properties in 5 countries, and her name appeared on Forbes lists. Her silver hair was styled perfectly, her jewelry understated but unmistakably real, and her eyes, those sharp, intelligent eyes that had once looked at Ayana with such pride, now stared at her granddaughter with an expression Ayana couldn't read. Shock, maybe. Horror, definitely. The rain fell between them like a curtain. Neither knew how to pull back. Folasade's driver, a large man in a black suit, had stepped out too and was holding an umbrella over his employer, but Folasade didn't seem to notice the rain. She just stared. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of 3 years of absence and the sharp edge of a woman who had built empires by never accepting excuses. Ayana. The name came out like a question and an accusation at the same time. Ayana couldn't speak. Her throat had closed up, and tears were already streaming down her face, mixing with the rain. She hadn't cried in front of anyone in 2 years, had trained herself to be stone when people hurled insults or kicked at her while she slept. But seeing her grandmother shattered every defense she had built. Folasade took 3 steps forward, her expensive shoes splashing in puddles she would never normally walk through. "Ayana, is that you? What are you doing here? Where are your clothes? Where is—" She stopped abruptly, and her expression changed from shock to something harder, something that made the rain seem warm by comparison. "Where is the 80,000 pounds I sent for your university?" The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Ayana had imagined this conversation 1,000 times, rehearsed her answers in the dark hours before dawn, but now that the moment was here, she found she couldn't organize the words properly. 3 years of betrayal, lies, theft, and survival couldn't be summarized in a sentence. But then she remembered where she was, what she had become, and the anger that she had buried under layers of shame and defeat suddenly roared to life. She stood up on shaking legs, her cardboard sign falling into a puddle. She was taller than her grandmother by 3 inches, but she had never felt smaller. With a hand that trembled from cold and fury and the sheer impossibility of this moment, Ayana pointed across the plaza to where a silver limousine was idling near the taxi rank. A woman was climbing into the back seat, a woman in a camel-colored coat and expensive boots, her hair done in the latest style, her entire presence screaming money and comfort and a life built on stolen foundations. "Ask her," Ayana said, and her voice came out stronger than she expected. "That woman right there, that's Ayana, my stepmother. She has your money. She took every pound you sent and used it to send her own daughter to university while I—" Her voice broke, but she forced the words out anyway. "While I slept under bridges and begged for food." Folasade's head snapped toward the limousine, and what happened to her face in that moment would haunt Ayana's memory forever. It was like watching someone's humanity strip away to reveal something ancient and merciless underneath. The kind of rage that built empires and destroyed kingdoms. Folasade didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She simply turned to her driver and said 3 words in a tone that could freeze blood. "Stop that car." The driver moved with the efficiency of someone who had done this kind of thing before. He was back in the Rolls-Royce before Folasade finished speaking, and the luxury vehicle surged forward with a growl of its engine, cutting across the plaza and positioning itself directly in front of the limousine before it could pull into traffic. The limo driver hit his brakes, and through the rain, Ayana could see Ayana's face in the back window, first annoyed at the inconvenience, then confused at the expensive car blocking her path, then absolutely terrified when she recognized who was stepping out of it. Folasade walked toward that limousine like a woman who had never heard the word no in her life, and Ayana followed on numb feet, unable to believe this was actually happening. A crowd was starting to gather because Londoners might ignore a beggar, but they never ignored drama, especially when it involved cars that cost more than houses. Ayana's door opened slowly, and she stepped out with the kind of fake smile that Ayana remembered from every lie the woman had ever told. Ayana was 43, beautiful in the way that money and good genes combined, her skin smooth and dark, her body fit from personal trainers and yoga classes that cost more per session than Ayana made in a week of begging. She was wearing gold jewelry that caught the light, carrying a handbag that Ayana recognized as Hermes because her father used to buy her mother bags like that before the cancer took her. Ayana's eyes flickered to Ayana for just a second, and in that glance, Ayana saw calculation, fear, and something that might have been guilt before it was buried under practiced charm. Ayana turned the full force of her smile on Folasade and opened her arms like they were old friends reuniting. "Folasade, what a wonderful surprise! I had no idea you were in London. If you had called, I would have. She didn't get to finish because Folasad's voice cut through her words like a machete through sugarcane. Where is the 80,000 pounds I sent 3 years ago for my granddaughter's education? The question was delivered in a tone that made it clear there was only one acceptable answer, and that answer needed to be immediate and truthful. Ayana's smile flickered but held. She was good at this. Ayana had to give her that. 3 years of lying to one of the most powerful women in West Africa took serious skill. Ayana laughed, a light tinkling sound that was probably supposed to sound natural but came out forced. Oh, that money. Well, Folasad, I'm afraid there was a situation. Ayana, she made some poor choices. She fell in with a bad crowd, started dating this boy, and She's standing right here, Folasad interrupted, her voice dropping even lower, which somehow made it more terrifying. And she's been begging on the street, so I'll ask you one more time. And I suggest you think very carefully about your answer. Where is my money? The crowd had grown larger now, phones were out, and Ayana realized with a sick feeling that this was probably being recorded by a dozen people. But she didn't care anymore. Let them record. Let the whole world watch. Ayana's smile finally died completely, and her face shifted into something harder, more defensive. She straightened her spine and lifted her chin, and when she spoke again, her voice had steel in it. Your granddaughter ran away. She dropped out before even starting university. She took up with some boy, wouldn't listen to reason, and she left. I tried to stop her, tried to help her, but she was 18 and legally an adult. What was I supposed to do? The money sat in an education account, and when it became clear she wasn't coming back, I made the difficult decision to use it for Chinara's education instead. My daughter needed. Your daughter is in my granddaughter's university seat, Folasad said, and it wasn't a question. Ayana's eyes widened slightly, the first crack in her armor. Before she could respond, the limousine's other door opened, and a young woman stepped out. Chinara was 22 now, and she looked exactly like what 80,000 pounds of education and comfort could buy. She was wearing imperial college gear, expensive jeans, boots that probably cost a month of Ayana's former rent. Her hair was styled beautifully, her makeup perfect, her entire presence screaming privilege and opportunity. When Chinara saw Ayana, really saw her for the first time in 3 years, something broke in her face. Guilt, raw and undeniable, flooded her features, her eyes filled with tears, and she took a step toward Ayana before stopping herself, her hand half raised like she wanted to reach out but didn't dare. Ayana, Chinara whispered, and her voice cracked on the name. Oh God, Ayana, I didn't. Mum said you were fine. She said you'd gone to Manchester. She said. She turned to her mother with an expression of dawning horror. Mum, you said she was fine. You said she called you. You said she was working and didn't want contact with the family. You said. Her voice rose with each sentence until she was almost shouting. You said grandmother approved the money for me. You showed me emails. You. She stopped abruptly, her hand flying to her mouth as the full weight of what her mother had done crashed down on her. Folasad's phone was already out, her fingers moving with practiced speed. I'm calling my lawyers, she said calmly, though her eyes were anything but calm. And then I'm calling the police. Wire fraud, identity theft, embezzlement of funds designated for a specific individual, forgery if you created false emails, child abandonment if you forced her out while she was your legal dependent. Ayana's composure finally shattered completely. Her face went pale under her makeup, and she grabbed Folasad's arm with desperate fingers. You can't. I'm family. Your son married me. You can't destroy me over money I used for education anyway. It went to a good cause. Chinara is thriving at Imperial College. She's doing amazingly. Folasad pulled her arm away like Ayana's touch was contaminated. You stole from my dead son's child. You threw her into the street and let her believe I had abandoned her. You forged communications and committed fraud across international lines. She glanced at Ayana, and for the first time since the confrontation began, her voice softened just slightly. How long have you been homeless? Ayana's voice came out as barely a whisper. 2 years and 8 months. The number hit like a physical blow. Folasad actually stumbled back a step, and her driver moved forward instinctively to steady her. Chinara made a sound like a wounded animal and sank to her knees on the wet pavement, her expensive clothes immediately soaking through, but she didn't seem to notice. Ayana opened her mouth to say something else, but Folasad held up one finger, and the gesture carried such authority that, even in her panic, Ayana fell silent. The first police car arrived within 6 minutes because when billionaires call the police in central London, response times tend to be excellent. 2 officers stepped out, and Folasad met them with the kind of calm, organized fury that came from decades of handling business crises. She had her phone out, showing bank transfer receipts, emails, documentation that she had clearly kept meticulously organized for 3 years. The original transfer of £80,000, sent with clear instructions that it was for Ayana Okonkwo's university education and living expenses. The timestamp showed it had been sent 2 weeks after Ayana's father's funeral. One of the officers, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes, looked at the documents and then at Ayana. Did you receive these funds? Ayana's lawyer instincts kicked in, probably too late. I'm not saying anything without legal representation. This is a family matter being blown out of proportion. I demand. The officer cut her off with professional efficiency. You're not under arrest yet, ma'am, but I'd advise cooperating. We'll need to see records of how the funds were used. Do you have documentation showing the money went to Ayana Okonkwo's education? The silence that followed was answer enough. The second officer was already on his radio, calling for additional units and what sounded like a financial crimes investigator. Folasad turned to Chinara, who was still on her knees, tears streaming down her face. Her voice was not unkind when she spoke to the girl. Did you know? The truth, child. Chinara looked up with devastated eyes. I swear I didn't know. Mum showed me emails that looked like they were from you, approving the money for my education. She said Ayana had dropped out and moved away, that she was angry with everyone and didn't want contact. She showed me texts, supposedly from Ayana, saying horrible things about me and the family. I thought, her voice broke, I thought it was all real. I thought Ayana hated us. I saw her once, about 6 months ago in Covent Garden. She looked homeless, and fresh tears. I walked away. I thought she'd made her choices. Oh God, I walked away. She turned to Ayana with a look of such genuine anguish that Ayana actually felt a flicker of something that wasn't hatred. Not forgiveness, not yet, maybe never, but the recognition that Chinara had been manipulated too, just differently. Chinara crawled across the wet pavement until she was at Ayana's feet, her expensive clothes ruined, her pride completely gone. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll give it all back. I'll drop out. Ayana looked down at her stepsister and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no anger, just a vast emptiness where emotions used to live. She had spent so much energy hating Chinara, imagining this confrontation, but now that it was here, she just felt tired, exhausted down to her bones. The police were searching Ayana's limousine now, and they had found her laptop bag. One of the officers was already scrolling through something on the computer, his expression growing more serious. Ma'am, he called to the senior officer, we've got emails here in the drafts folder. Looks like correspondence forged to appear from both the grandmother and the granddaughter. IP address metadata is going to tell us a lot. Ayana made a run for it. It was stupid and desperate and doomed to fail. But she tried anyway, kicking off her expensive heels and sprinting in her stockings toward the taxi rank. She made it maybe 20 feet before the male officer caught her easily, bringing her down with professional efficiency that suggested he had done this many times before. She fought him, screaming about how this was all a misunderstanding, how her lawyers would destroy them all, how Folasad couldn't do this to family. The officer cuffed her with practiced hands and read her rights in a bored tone that suggested he had heard every justification and excuse 1,000 times before. Ayana was still screaming when they put her in the back of the police car, her face pressed against the window, her makeup running in black streaks down her face. She locked eyes with Ayana one last time, and whatever she saw there made her fall silent. Maybe she finally understood what she had done. Maybe she was just calculating her legal defense. Ayana would never know and found she didn't care. Folasad's hand settled on Ayana's shoulder, gentle and warm, and that small touch broke something inside her that the confrontation hadn't touched. Ayana turned and buried her face in her grandmother's expensive coat and sobbed like a child, 3 years of pain and fear and humiliation pouring out in gasping waves that shook her whole body. Folasad held her and made soft, shushing sounds in Yoruba, the language of their ancestors, words of comfort that Ayana hadn't heard since her father died. "I've got you now," Folasad whispered. "I've got you, and I will never let you go again. Never." The crowd was dispersing now that the drama was over, already moving on to their next trains and appointments and lives that didn't include homeless girls and family betrayals. But several people approached Ayana before they left, pressing cash into her hands, telling her they hoped things got better, apologizing for walking past her earlier. One woman left a business card for a charity that helped young people get off the streets. An older man gave her his umbrella and said, "You keep that, love. You need it more than I do." These small kindnesses coming after such cruelty made Ayana cry harder. Chinara was still on the ground, her sobs audible even over the rain and traffic. Folasade looked at her for a long moment, then sighed. "Get up, child. You'll catch pneumonia." She turned to her driver. "Take her home. Make sure she gets there safely." Chinara looked up in shock. You're not having me arrested?" Folasad's expression was complex, layered with anger and pity, and something that might have been understanding. "You were lied to and manipulated by your mother. The emails will prove that. But you will face consequences. Your university will be notified of how your tuition was obtained. That will be their decision to make. You will repay every pound spent on you from that money, whether through work or loans or whatever means you have to find, and you will spend the next several years earning back even a fraction of the trust you lost." She paused. "But you are not your mother. You have a chance to become better than what she made you. Don't waste it." Chinara nodded, unable to speak, and let the driver help her to her feet and guide her to the Rolls-Royce. Before she got in, she looked back at Ayana one more time. "I know you'll never forgive me," she said quietly. "I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be someone who might deserve it someday." Then she was gone, and it was just Ayana and Folasad and the rain that was finally starting to let up. Folasad's phone buzzed with a text. She glanced at it and nodded to herself. "My lawyers are already filing civil suits to recover the funds and damages. The Crown Prosecution Service will handle the criminal charges. Your stepmother will be in prison for a very long time." She looked at Ayana, really looked at her, taking in the filthy clothes, the gaunt face, the shaking hands. "When did you last eat a real meal?" Ayana tried to remember and couldn't. "I had soup at a shelter 2 days ago, I think." Folasad's jaw tightened. We're going to a hospital right now. You need to be checked by doctors, properly fed, given clean clothes, and—" She stopped, her voice breaking for the first time. "My granddaughter has been living on the streets, and I didn't know. I should have known. I should have come looking for you myself instead of believing those emails. I failed you." "She lied to both of us," Ayana said softly. "She was good at lying." They stood there in the rain for another moment, grandmother and granddaughter separated by 3 years of hell, but connected by blood and love that had survived even this. Finally, Folasad took Ayana's hand, her actual hand, not caring that it was dirty and scarred, and led her toward the Rolls-Royce. "Come, we have a lot to fix, and it starts now." Ayana followed, her feet moving automatically, her mind unable to fully process that this was real, that the nightmare was actually ending. As she settled into the leather seats of the Rolls-Royce, softer and warmer than anything she had touched in years, she looked back at the spot where she had been begging just 30 minutes ago. Her cardboard sign was still there, floating in a puddle, the words bleeding away to nothing. Someone else would probably take that spot before morning. Someone else would sit in the cold and hope for kindness from strangers. But it wouldn't be her. Not anymore. The hospital was private, the kind of place where billionaires went when they needed discretion along with their health care. Ayana was admitted immediately, whisked away by nurses who spoke in soft, professional tones and didn't ask invasive questions about how a young woman ended up in this condition. They ran tests, drew blood, checked her vitals with concerned efficiency. A doctor who looked far too young to be as competent as he clearly was examined her carefully, his face growing more serious as he worked. When he finally spoke to Folasad in the hallway, Ayana could hear through the partially open door. His voice was grim. Severe malnutrition, early signs of frostbite on her toes that will require treatment, dehydration, vitamin deficiencies that will take months to correct, possible damage to her kidneys and liver from prolonged exposure and poor diet. He paused. "Another few months living like this, and we'd be looking at organ failure. You found her just in time." Folasad's response was too quiet to hear, but Ayana saw her grandmother sit down heavily in a chair in the hallway, her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. It was the only time Ayana ever saw her grandmother break down, and somehow that made everything real in a way that even the arrest hadn't. She had almost died. Actually, literally died, and she hadn't even realized how close she had come. The nurses set up an IV, started her on fluids and nutrients, brought her warm blankets and clean hospital gowns that smelled like detergent and safety. One of them, a kind-faced woman, probably in her 50s, gently cut away Ayana's filthy clothes and helped her into a shower, standing by in case she fell, but giving her privacy where she could. The hot water was the most incredible thing Ayana had felt in years. She stood under the spray until it ran cold, washing away layers of grime and shame, watching 3 years of street life circle the drain. When she emerged, there were new clothes waiting for her. Real clothes, soft and clean, and in her size. Someone had gone shopping while she showered, had known what to buy, had cared enough to make sure she had dignity. Ayana dressed slowly, her hands shaking from weakness and emotion, and when she looked in the mirror, she saw something she hadn't seen in a long time. Herself. Not the homeless girl, not the beggar, not the victim, just Ayana. Folasad was waiting when she came out, sitting in a chair beside a hospital bed that looked more comfortable than any bed Ayana had slept in since her father died. Her grandmother stood when she entered, and they looked at each other across the small room, across the chasm of 3 years and all the pain that lived there. "I want to stay in London," Ayana said quietly. "I want to go to LSE. I want to finish what I started." She expected argument, expected her grandmother to insist she come to Lagos, Come home, forget about university, and focus on healing. But Folasad just nodded. Then that's what we'll do. I'll call the admissions office tomorrow. We'll explain the situation, provide documentation of the fraud, request deferred admission. If they won't accommodate us, I'll make calls to the university president. If that doesn't work, I'll fund a new building until they have no choice but to listen. She smiled slightly, and it was the smile of a woman who had built an empire by refusing to take no for an answer. You will have your education, Ayana. Everything that was stolen from you will be returned, one way or another. The legal process moved faster than Ayana expected, because when you have resources and clear evidence of fraud, the system suddenly becomes much more efficient. Within a week, Folasad's lawyers had recovered full documentation of how the £80,000 had been spent. Every pound accounted for: Imperial College tuition, Chinara's accommodation in a luxury student apartment, a car, designer clothes, vacations during reading week, a laptop, iPad, and phone. Textbooks, though those were probably the smallest expense on the list. Ayana had spent Ayana's future like it was her personal shopping fund. The preliminary hearing happened 3 weeks after the arrest. Ayana showed up in court with an expensive legal team that her family money had secured, wearing a conservative suit and her hair pulled back, trying to look respectable and remorseful. Her lawyers argued that this was a family dispute being criminalized, that the money had been used for educational purposes as intended, just for a different family member, that Ayana had believed Ayana to be willfully absent and had made a difficult choice in good faith. The prosecution destroyed these arguments methodically. They presented the forged emails that Ayana had created, pretending to be both Folasad approving the fund transfer to Chinara and Ayana sending hateful messages, cutting off contact with the family. They showed phone records proving Ayana had blocked Folasad's number on Ayana's phone before taking the device entirely. They presented testimony from shelter workers who confirmed Ayana had been homeless for nearly 3 years. They brought in digital forensics showing that all the emails had been sent from Ayana's computer, from her IP address, during times when she was demonstrably alone. Most damning of all, they found Ayana's passport, birth certificate, and national insurance documents hidden in a safe in Ayana's home office. She had kept them deliberately, preventing Ayana from being able to prove her identity or access any services. That elevated the charges from fraud to unlawful imprisonment and identity theft. Chinara testified against her mother. She did it in a voice that shook with grief and guilt, describing how her mother had shown her emails that appeared legitimate, how she had believed for 3 years that Ayana had abandoned the family and was living her own life somewhere else. "I thought she hated us," Chinara said from the witness stand, tears streaming down her face. "Mum was so convincing. She showed me texts, emails, even a Facebook profile that she said was Ayana's new life with a boyfriend in Manchester. I never imagined she would lie about something this serious." The defense tried to suggest that Chinara was lying to save herself, but the prosecution had her university record showing she had cooperated fully from the moment of discovery, had voluntarily withdrawn from Imperial College despite being offered the chance to stay, and had begun working 2 jobs to start repaying the money. The judge was not sympathetic to Ayana. When she finally got a chance to speak, Ayana tried the remorse approach, claiming she had made a terrible mistake in a moment of grief and financial stress after her husband's death. But the prosecution pointed out that she had continued the deception for 3 years, had actively maintained the lies, had renewed Chinara's university tuition each year knowing exactly where the money came from. This wasn't a single mistake. It was a calculated, ongoing fraud. The judge sentenced her to 5 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 3. She was also ordered to repay the full £80,000 plus damages, court costs, and interest. Her assets were frozen pending the civil suit that Folasade had filed, which sought additional damages for emotional distress and harm. Ayana attended the sentencing but didn't speak. She had been given the opportunity to provide a victim impact statement, but she found she had nothing to say to Ayana. What could she say that would matter? What words could encompass 3 years of hunger, cold, fear, and humiliation? She simply sat in the gallery next to her grandmother and watched as the woman who had destroyed her life was led away in handcuffs. Ayana looked back at her once, just before the guards took her through the door, and her expression was impossible to read. Regret, maybe. Anger, possibly. Or just the blank look of someone who couldn't quite believe their actions had consequences. Then she was gone, and that chapter of Ayana's life closed with the sound of a door locking. Folasade had purchased a flat for Ayana in Bloomsbury, within walking distance of LSE. It was nothing extravagant by her grandmother's standards, just a one-bedroom with large windows, updated appliances, and the kind of security that made Ayana feel safe for the first time in years. She moved in with almost nothing because she owned almost nothing, just the clothes Folasade had bought her and the acceptance letter she had carried through everything. The university had been understanding when Folasade's lawyers explained the situation. More than understanding, actually, horrified. They expedited Ayana's delayed admission and offered her a full scholarship on top of the money that had been recovered, along with access to counseling services and academic support. The dean of students personally called to apologize that the university hadn't somehow caught the fraud when the money had been redirected to a different student. Ayana started classes 6 months after the metro station encounter in the winter semester. She was 22 now, older than most of her classmates, and she carried a weight that they couldn't see but that she felt every day. The first few weeks were overwhelming. She had forgotten how to be a student, how to sit in lectures and take notes and participate in discussions. Her mind kept wandering to survival mode, calculating where the free food was, planning where she could sleep if the flat disappeared, hoarding supplies just in case. Her therapist said this was normal for trauma survivors, that it would take time for her brain to understand she was safe now. The nightmares were the worst part. She would wake up gasping, convinced she was back under the bridge near Waterloo, convinced the flat and the university and her grandmother were all just cruel dreams her freezing brain had invented. It took her months to sleep through the night without waking in a panic, but slowly, day by day, she began to believe it was real. She made friends with a few other students, mostly older ones who were returning to education after life had interrupted. She joined a study group for economics. She got her first essay back with a mark of 72, and her professor's note said, "Excellent analysis. Your perspective is unique and valuable." She cried in the library when she read that because she had thought she had forgotten how to be smart, how to think critically, how to be anything other than invisible and desperate. Chinara reached out 6 months into Ayana's first year. A simple email. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I understand. But I wanted you to know I completed a victim awareness program. I'm working full-time and part-time to repay the money, and I've enrolled in evening classes at community college. I'm studying social work. I want to help people who've been through what you went through. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I'm trying to be better." Ayana didn't respond immediately. She let the email sit in her inbox for 3 weeks while she decided how she felt about it. In the end, she wrote back just 4 words. "Keep trying. Don't stop." It wasn't forgiveness. She didn't know if she would ever get there. But it was acknowledgement that Chinara was making an effort, and maybe that was enough for now. A year passed, then another. Ayana threw herself into her studies with an intensity that worried her therapist, but that she couldn't seem to moderate. Every essay, every exam, every presentation was proof that she was still here, still capable, still deserving of the future that had been stolen from her. She made the dean's list both years. In her third year, she was offered a research assistant position with one of the senior professors. By her final year, she had 3 job offers from major financial firms in London before she even graduated. The day she graduated from the London School of Economics, Folasade flew in from Lagos with a delegation of family members Ayana barely remembered, aunts and uncles and cousins who had been absent during her homeless years but who showed up now that the drama was over and the ending was happy. Ayana tried not to be bitter about that, and mostly succeeded. Folasade sat in the front row wearing traditional Nigerian dress in deep purple and gold, her face glowing with pride that made her look 10 years younger. When Ayana walked across the stage to receive her degree, graduating with first-class honors, the highest classification, the applause from her section was deafening. Chinara was there too, sitting in the back, clapping with tears streaming down her face. They had met for coffee twice in the past year, awkward meetings where they talked about everything except the past, building something new that wasn't quite friendship but wasn't hatred either. After the ceremony, Chinara approached carefully, keeping her distance, respecting boundaries. "Congratulations," she said quietly. "You did it. Everything Mum tried to take from you, you got it back through your own work. I'm proud of you." Ayana looked at her stepsister, not so different in age, but separated by experiences that made them feel like different generations, and nodded. "Thank you for coming." It was all she could offer, and Chinara seemed to understand that it was enough. The celebration dinner was at one of London's finest restaurants, the kind of place Ayana had once thought she would never see the inside of. Folasade gave a toast that made everyone cry, talking about resilience and family and the strength it takes to rebuild from nothing. She didn't mention Ayana, who was still in prison with 2 years left on her sentence. That name didn't belong in this moment. After dinner, when the extended family had dispersed, and it was just Ayana and Folasade in the car heading back to the flat, her grandmother reached over and took her hand. "I have something for you." She pulled out an envelope, expensive paper, Folasade's company logo embossed on the back. Inside was an acceptance letter to Oxford University's master's program in economics and a full funding package for 2 years. "You got in?" Ayana whispered. "I didn't even know you applied for me." Folasade smiled. "I didn't. You applied 3 months ago. You don't remember. You were so stressed about finals." Ayana did remember now, vaguely, filling out the application at 2 a.m. between study sessions, not really believing anything would come of it. "I got in," she repeated, the words not quite sinking in. "You got in," Folasade confirmed. "And you're going to go, and you're going to be brilliant, and you're going to build a future so bright that what happened to you will be just a chapter in your story, not the whole book." Ayana looked down at the letter, at her name printed in official Oxford formatting, and felt something shift inside her. Not healing, she wasn't naive enough to think trauma just disappeared, but maybe the beginning of peace. She had survived. More than survived. She had won. 2 years later, Ayana was finishing her master's thesis at Oxford when she got the call that Ayana was up for parole. The parole board wanted to know if Ayana would attend the hearing, if she wanted to speak. She thought about it for a long time. She talked to her therapist, to Folasade, to Chinara, to her closest friends. In the end, she decided to go, not because she owed Ayana anything, but because she needed to see for herself what 5 years in prison had done to the woman who had destroyed her life. The hearing was in a drab government building that smelled like floor cleaner and institutional despair. Ayana looked older, harder, her hair showing gray that she hadn't bothered to dye, her face lined in ways that had nothing to do with age. When she saw Ayana enter the hearing room, something flickered in her eyes. Shame, maybe, or just surprise that Ayana had bothered to show up. The parole board asked their questions. Had she shown remorse? Had she participated in rehabilitation programs? Did she understand the harm she had caused? Ayana's answers were textbook perfect, clearly coached by lawyers or social workers. Yes, she regretted her actions deeply. Yes, she understood she had hurt people. Yes, she had completed every program offered to her. When it was Ayana's turn to speak, she stood up slowly, gathering her thoughts. She had prepared a speech, pages of it, detailing every horrible moment of those 3 years, every night she thought she might freeze to death, every time someone spat at her or kicked her or told her she was worthless. But standing there, looking at this broken woman who had once seemed so powerful, Ayana found she didn't want to give that speech. Instead, she said simply, "I don't forgive you. I probably never will. What you did was evil and calculated, and you destroyed 3 years of my life that I can never get back." The room was absolutely silent. Ayana's eyes were on the floor. "But," Ayana continued, "you don't have power over me anymore. You tried to bury me, and you didn't know I was a seed. I survived. I thrived. I built a life so far beyond what you tried to reduce me to that you can't even comprehend it. So whether you get parole or not doesn't matter to me. You're irrelevant to my life now. You're just a sad story I tell sometimes about obstacles I overcame." She sat down, her hands shaking slightly, but her voice had been steady. The parole board granted Ayana early release, with conditions. Ayana didn't care. She walked out of that building and drove back to Oxford and finished her thesis, which was eventually published in a major economics journal and cited by researchers across Europe. She graduated with distinction and accepted a position at a prestigious think tank in London. Her specialty became economic inequality and systems that trap people in poverty cycles. She spoke at conferences about her experiences, advocating for policy changes to help people who fell through the cracks like she had. She became exactly the kind of voice that the system needed, someone who had lived the statistics, who could talk about poverty not as an abstract concept, but as a lived reality. 3 years after her master's graduation, Ayana was walking through King's Cross Station on her way to a meeting when she saw a young girl begging near the exact spot where her life had changed. The girl couldn't have been more than 19, holding a sign that read, "Homeless, please help," her eyes down, her shoulders hunched against the cold. Ayana stopped walking. Commuters flowed around her like water around a stone, and she stood there remembering what it felt like to be that invisible, that desperate. She remembered the people who had walked past without seeing her, and she remembered the few who had stopped, who had given her not just money but dignity, recognition that she was human. She walked over to the girl and knelt down so they were at eye level. The girl looked up, startled and defensive, probably expecting to be told to move along. Instead, Ayana pulled out her wallet and took out £100. She also pulled out a business card, her business card, with her name and title and office number. "Take this," Ayana said gently. "The money is for whatever you need right now. The card is for tomorrow. Call me. I know people who can help. I know how to navigate the system. I know how to get you documents if yours are missing, how to access emergency housing, how to connect you with services. But you have to call." The girl stared at the money and the card, like they might disappear if she looked away. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you help me?" Ayana smiled, and it was the saddest, most understanding smile. "Because 5 years ago I was sitting right where you are now, and someone helped me. Not the same way, not at first, but eventually. And I survived. And now I pass it forward." She stood up and pressed both the money and card firmly into the girl's hand. "Call me tomorrow, promise." The girl nodded, tears streaming down her face, unable to speak. Ayana walked away, her heels clicking on the station floor, her designer coat keeping out the November cold, her future bright and wide open. She didn't look back because she didn't need to. She knew the girl would call. She knew because she understood that when you're drowning, you don't refuse a hand that reaches down to pull you up. And if she didn't call, there would be another girl, another person who needed help, another chance to be the intervention that changes everything. That night, back in her flat in Kensington, the flat that Folisade had bought her, that she would eventually buy from her grandmother with her own money, Ayana stood by the window looking out over London. The city lights sparkled like stars, millions of lives happening simultaneously, millions of stories of joy and suffering and survival. Somewhere in those lights, Ayana was living in a parole hostel, probably bitter about how things had turned out. Somewhere out there, Chinara was finishing her social work degree and trying to rebuild her life. And somewhere in those lights, a homeless girl was holding £100 and a business card, deciding whether to believe that tomorrow could be different from today. Ayana thought about her father, who she still missed every day, and wondered what he would think of who she had become. She thought about the 3 years she had lost, and about all the years she had gained since then. The trauma would always be part of her story. The nightmares still came sometimes. The fear of losing everything never quite went away, but neither did her strength, her resilience, or her absolute determination that what had happened to her would mean something. She pulled out her phone and texted Folisade, "You saw a homeless girl at King's Cross today, same spot. I gave her my card." 3 dots appeared immediately. Then, "Of course you did. You are your father's daughter. He would be so proud. I am so proud." Ayana smiled and set down her phone. Tomorrow she had a presentation to the Department of Work and Pensions about reforming the benefits system. Next month, she was speaking at a conference in Geneva about economic mobility. Next year, if her proposal was accepted, she would be advising the government on homelessness prevention strategies. She had taken her pain and transformed it into purpose, her suffering into service, her trauma into triumph. Ayana had tried to bury her, but like her grandmother had said when they first reunited, Ayana was a seed, and seeds, when buried, don't die. They grow, they break through the darkness, they reach for the light, and eventually they bloom into something beautiful and strong and impossible to destroy. Ayana Okonkwo had bloomed, and she was just getting started. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that no matter how dark things get, there's always hope for a better tomorrow. Have you ever overcome a betrayal or found strength when everything seemed lost? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might inspire someone else who's struggling right now. Remember, you are stronger than whatever tried to break you. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story. Keep fighting, keep growing, keep blooming,